recording now, and we'll at least have the second half of it. I have the open source community meeting set up to automatically record as soon as I start it because I always forget. But this one, I need to change for that. Any other questions related to the timeline? All right, very good. On to the metadata tagging and part of the reason why we do this. So there are basically 4 tools, 4 resources, 5 if you count staging, which I don't have in here because that's not out there yet. But there's 5 or 4 resources that are listed here: Connect, Align, the Integrated Data Store, and Data Warehouse. Connect and Align are tools on the CEDS website, and the Integrated Data Store and the Data Warehouse are obviously physical environments. The Connect tool is where we, at the beginning of this project, we defined the use case, and in that we identify the CEDS elements that are necessary to actually accomplish that use case. The Align tool lets you take your source system data, so whatever database name, table name, column names, element names, definitions that you have, and align those over to CEDS. So you're picking a CEDS element that matches, or one or more, that matches with your particular element inside your database. And then, of course, we have the IDS, which has all of the CEDS elements. The data model there integrates them all into a single unified data model where all the elements live and can work together. And then we have the data warehouse, where sections of that data are stored longitudinally based around certain use cases. So what we're looking at here is there are 2 primary element IDs that CEDS has. There's actually 3, but I won't talk about the third one right now. But there's 2 primary IDs that CEDS has for every element inside of CEDS. And those are the global ID, which never changes and is tied specifically to an element and its definition. So first name has a global ID. And whether it's the first name of the parent or the first name of the student or the first name of the teacher, doesn't matter. It has a single definition. So each of those first names have one global ID, and that never changes from version to version. So because it's definition based, it never changes. There's a second ID, which is the CEDS data model ID. And if you've ever done any align mapping, that data model ID is contextualized to the situation. So the student's first name has an ID in addition to the global ID. The teacher's first name has a different CEDS data model ID than the global ID. The parent's first name has a different CEDS. So 3 different IDs for first name, just parent, student, all having the same global ID. That ID gives us context around what kind of first name are we talking about, right? So the Connect tool, when you go to create a use case and you pick an element, the element you pick is within context. So it has both the term-X topic ID and the global ID associated with it. So we know from your use case exactly which elements you need or you would need in the warehouse or in the IDS to make that use case a reality, to see a report around that. And we know not only the global ID, we know within context, whether it's the first name of the student or the parent, etc. The Align tool also, when you do your mapping, you're giving not only information about mapping to a particular element that would have a global ID, because all elements have global IDs, you're also giving context about that particular ID at the same time. So between Connect and Align, we can bring the 2 of those together using those IDs to say, here's what you want to accomplish, here's where it lives within your system in context, because those 2 IDs will connect the use case to your Align map and show us where the data lives inside your table and column names. Now we need to be able to extract that or give that information right to a developer to be able to take the data from your source system and load it into either the IDS or the CEDS warehouse or both, depending on the process and the type of data that's going to make its way in. The IDS only has the global ID because it normalizes everything. A first name is a first name regardless of who that is. So it has the global IDs. The ability to load the IDS from your source system, not a problem. Then we have, but it doesn't contain the term-X topic ID because everything is normalized. So first name's a first name and the person's a person. And then there's roles and things assigned. We can carry over though to the data warehouse because once again, we've become contextualized in the warehouse about this is a K-12 student. This is the K-12 DIM students, and that's their first name. So we know that again. So we have the ability again to know from the warehouse the global ID and the term X topic ID. So if you would, let me pull up a report here real quick so I can show you. Using this information, which is why it's really important that we tag the data warehouse. Right now, the IDS is tagged. So if I pull up the IDS, and I was to look at, there's a table actually in here, CEDS mapping. This is the global ID. It gives you the name of every table related to that ID, and then the column name specifically related to that. So you can know exactly, so you go to CEDS and you find an element, I can tell you exactly where it lives in the IDS because every element is tagged. So if I go to assessment and I right click and look at the properties of the identifier and I go to the extended properties, here is the CEDS information. It's an assessment identifier. There's the global ID. There's the definition of CEDS. That's tagged in there. So from the IDS perspective, what I could do coming back over to this, from the IDS perspective, I could, using your align map and the connection, so the connection tells me exactly what you need. The align map tells me where it's at. The IDS metadata tagging tells me where it goes. We can build a crosswalk document to give to a developer. Might not be 100% of the way, but it'd be like 90% of the way there. We could provide like an Excel spreadsheet. Here's where it lives in our system. Here's where it goes in the IDS, right? That whole path can be created. That documentation can be created. What we want to do is tag the data warehouse, and that is what we're working on. And again, as I mentioned, something that DoubleLine's been helping with is tagging that data warehouse. So if I jump back over to there, what does that look like? That looks like this here. Well, and that's not the one I want to bring across. Why will it not let me grab? There we go. I'm never going to be able to pull this back. I might need, oh, I did it. Look at me, James. Okay. I was about to panic there. So that looks like this. Sid puts out things related to EdFacts called ETL checklist, but essentially all they are is that documentation that I talked about. So your source system, information, database, schema, your table names, your column names, your element names and definitions, etc. The ability to populate all of that using an align map over to the CEDS connection information, which in this instance happens to be an EdFacts file specification, so membership FSO52, but it could be any CEDS connection report, the ability to create that report. It's then, because the CEDS connection contains the elements you need to actually do that, here are all the CEDS element details, which would be mapped using a line over to your source system. And then we're able to cross over into, keep going over into, they call it a generate, the system's called generate that they have, but it's essentially the IDS, over to the IDS table column name, and then even making our way over then into, once we get everything tagged, the data warehouse column names. So the ability to build this report automatically is part of the reason why we're going through that metadata tagging process here on the warehouse. The staging tables would then also be metadata tagged too, as those are released later on. So your ability to query and produce a report out of that information is what we're working towards. That's kind of just an update of what's going on as far as why metadata tagging is so important.
Yeah.
So questions about metadata tagging? So we're going to get another use case. Okay, very good. So last thing would be just a quick overview of this. Talked with, emailed with really Douglas Gephardt within CES and made some changes. We did have a begin and end date. Whoa, all right, too far. We did have a begin and end date down here where it says side vintage, but he suggested a different element name and definition because they're not necessarily a begin and end date, but rather an amount of time, such as like the American Community Survey 2013 to 2015, that time gathered together. So it'll act almost like an ID to give you information about the vintage of that particular data that was used to create the site estimate. And for those that are not familiar, because I'm just talking about this like you know, The third use case is the poverty measure, which if you just read the first definition, it's the NCES spatially interpolated demographic estimate, which is based on the student's latitude and longitude location using their address. So NCES is working on using the address of the student, the ability to use that latitude and longitude of that address, and then using the American Community Survey, determine an estimate for their poverty level within that general area. Using that specific latitude and longitude, they can create an estimate. And so it's all working towards being an alternate method of identifying poverty. And there's several states through the SLDS grant that are actually working on this and testing that out. And they're using the free and reduced price lunch levels. So that estimate is like that 0 to, I'm going to get it wrong, but I think it's $9.99, but somewhere level in there that determines poverty and income and where the poverty threshold is. And so the states that are doing some of that work are comparing what they have for free reduced price lunch, and then also that to create some general idea of where the poverty threshold may actually truly lie for this estimate. But we want to get those elements into CEDS. And so what you see on the screen there is what we're going to be proposing for adding into CEDS. So those of you following the open source community, which you should be, you're going to see that release soon. So if you have any comments or thoughts about these elements, there'd be a place to comment in the CEDS GitHub site on those. The estimate is the actual number for the student. So from 0 to whatever, so maybe like, 234, right? That's going to be the estimate that's related to that student. The standard error gives you an idea of how much that may be off. The process date is something that we're adding that would be to store the data, because it's important to know when it was run through the blind side, which is what's called blind side. When it was run through that application and this information was pulled down, because things can change about address information, that estimate may be different the next time. And that's going to be based on the process date and the vintage. So having both of those information, I know I processed this, I processed a year later, the vintage was the same on both, the estimates would be the same on both. The vintage changed, new process date, I now have historical information from about this latitude, longitude for this particular student. So that's what those 4 elements are that would give us that information. So you'll see that coming through the open source community. Any questions? Let me jump back over here because it's kind of the timeline about any of this so far. Not much to discuss, just more to inform. All right, not seeing anything in there. If you do have any questions or perhaps have a use case or maybe moving forward, you can email myself or Kathy. But we'll have our next meeting the end of July, and hopefully at that point, we're going to be real close to releasing the pull request and actually having that information over in the warehouse. If we have anything else, we'll send it through the Data Warehouse Expansion Community Listserv. But that's all. So everything, I'll stick around here for a little longer. But everyone else, thanks for coming and have a great day.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Yep, thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. Are we going to be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint too, please?
Yep.
So I can take it to people and go, I have no idea what Dwayne just said. Can someone please interpret?
Now, I will say we do have this other slide back here, separate meeting times with CEDS SLDS team. So if you need a meeting to explain what I just said, I'm happy to do that as well. But I'll give you the PowerPoint as well. Happy to always meet with anyone who has additional questions.
Okay.
More than that, but I will send that over.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Have a
Hey,
good
Dwayne.
day.
Hey, Dwayne, this is June. I have a question on the ETL checklist piece that you went over. By the way, I thought you just did a really great recap of the whole process. And it's like, every time I see it, it starts to pull more and more together for me, which is awesome.
That's good.
But on the ETL checklist, when are you are you saying that is kind of the roadmap that we would use when we're working with an ETL developer to take the information from our source and get it into and first the IDS and then
Yeah.
the warehouse and then generate?
So if
Is
you
that
get
how
it
that
the
works?
IDS and the warehouse, it's in generate because that's the same. Generate uses the CEDS, IDS, and warehouse, the same thing. So, yeah, it would be. This would be the method for. It's a report that we want the developers to have because they're going to need to know out of this particular system is where the data comes from. And this is what, I mean, if you're doing a line mapping, I think you've met some with Andrea too, but when you do your align map in CEDS, which I had this, but I didn't pull it up, essentially see here, like you have the system name, you have the table name, the columns and element IDs and definitions, and the database name. That's what you have, the system name, the database name, the table name, the column names, the element names. All of these things come out of your align map.
Okay.
So we would have the ability, if you had align maps complete, that we could pull a report for you. The one thing that we don't yet have is the ability to come in on the option set level yet, but we can get you set up, and then you would need to add the options in. But we can set all of that up, and then we can map over to the IDS and staging. We just can't yet map to the data warehouse because we don't have that metadata tag yet.
Okay, so if I have, I just put in an align mapping, I just created it for our directory, and that's the first piece that we're going to actually start putting into our CEDS IDS.
Okay.
So that is in there, and it gives me the information of all of my elements and the definitions and our option sets, and it gives the, the global ID and the data ID, data model ID. Is that a document that I should use, or how does that information get over into like one of these ETL checklists?
So that's something we can help with. It'd be easier for a developer to do it.
Okay.
At this point, but it'd be something we could help with.
Okay.
So what your developer, you have Generate installed? Not yet.
No,
Well,
we're in the process of hiring a contractor to start doing this ETL work for us.
Okay.
So we're not quite there yet, but it will start with the CEDS IDS. Because I'm assuming that's kind of where we should start after we already have our elements aligned.
Yeah, if you have the elements aligned and you hire a contractor, they'll be extremely happy because they can grab the information. So there's a report. There's a report in CEDS. Did I close? Oh, it's over here. Let me run to a map real quick and show you. What this looks like. Now I'll just pick one here that I know, maybe line. I probably should have picked specifically. It wouldn't be quite as big. I don't know what I want to pick. I'll do a North Carolina one because I know those are published. Expand all. And we will grab which one? Something smaller. Well, it may not be mapped, but we'll go with this one. Okay. So in here, there's like several different reports, but a developer would be very happy with this one. Others might not be. These are more user-friendly, but somebody that wants to do mapping and create that ETL checklist is going to want this map formatted for upload.
Okay. And that's the one I've been selecting just to look over after I've put, after I've aligned it, and then I look at that and see how all the connections turned out.
Right, because it's going to give you all the way down to the option set, right?
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And so you have here your database name, your table name, your column names, all of that information about the data length, etc. And then when I don't know if they've mapped this as CEDS. Yeah, they did. And then here's your global ID, right? And then I think the data model ID, yeah, here's the data model ID. So here's your context, and then here's your global ID. Going into the IDS, you just need the global ID, but it's useful to have that also. But the global ID is here. And so this map, if you go download an ETL checklist and you were to give this map for upload to a developer, and you were also then to go give them the ETL checklist for directory, they could take both of these and then they could easily combine them using the global ID as the link.
Okay.
So the ETL checklists are nice because the whole right side is already completed for all of the, or not for all, but for most of the EDFACS files. That right side is already completed all the way into the warehouse, even without the metadata tagging. They've already got that completed. So if you're doing, EDFACS, that's already done for you. And so on that global ID, an Excel expert probably could do it as well. But using that global ID from your align map and the global ID right here, they can combine the two together, and they would be able then to fill in this left side of the ETL checklist. Now your developer knows I'm going from here to there.
Okay. Okay, makes sense. This is good. Thanks so much. I appreciate this.
Yep. We're trying to make it easier because most states understand their own data, but understanding CEDS is a little more complicated until you get familiar with it. So how can we make it easier for you to know exactly where in CEDS this goes? That's that metadata tagging that's helping us to create resources like this, to make it easier to link on IDs so you can produce documentation rather quickly for development staff.
Yep. So the IDS uses just the global ID, but the data warehouse uses both of the IDs, the global and the, okay. Yep. All right. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Okay. Have a good day. Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks, June. Bye.
Dwayne, Cynthia is wondering where you might be able to post the PowerPoint and the recording. Are those going to go? What do you think?
Easier just to show. Am I still sharing my screen? Good.
Yes.
I will go to, so with ceds.communities.ed.gov, there is in the open source community, the data warehouse expansion project. I will post that. It'll be in the workspace if you log in. Or I could just post the most recent one here. I'll post it right up here. I needed to update that.
Okay.
I'll post it right up there in the top here shortly.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dwayne.
All right. Sure thing.
We'll talk soon. Or do you want to go ahead and talk after this, or?
Sure, we can. Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.